You guys, I have a pretty shameful confession to admit. When I binge watch TV shows, I Google to see who dies and what happens to my favorite characters. It's nothing to be proud of, but spicy anxiety and cliffhangers just don't go hand in hand. This is probably the very same reason why I spend so many nights staying up late trying to figure out what the hell happened to John Bonet. Today we are talking about bizarre, unsolved true crime cases. I'm not talking about ones that are just a mystery and haven't been solved yet. I'm talking about ones that just make you feel uneasy. Because if there's one thing I'm good at, it's making people feel uncomfortable. So, with that being said, snuggle up your cat or dog, give them one extra little nose boop right from me, and let's get started. Cynthia, or Cindy James, was a 44-year-old nurse living in Richmond, British Columbia. She was recently divorced from a much older gentleman who was a psychiatrist. Cindy married relatively young, and she was just really excited and ready to start her new single life. Her friends and family said that she was just a really joyful person to be around. She was always in a good mood and always happy, and just one of those friends and humans you just loved to spend time with. Unfortunately for Cindy, she did not get to enjoy a lot of her new life that she was looking forward to because there was a lot of really bad things that began happening almost immediately of her moving in with her new place. She began getting phone calls, and it was a man on the other line threatening to kill her, saying that he was going to do really bad things to her. The phone calls were just the beginning of the harassment that Cindy would have to endure. She began getting letters in her mailbox, and not just really fun, welcome to the neighborhood letters. She would get kind of pic collages of women being strangled, someone holding a knife. The words "I see you" were cut out from magazine letters, and she was instantly just terrified about what these letters were supposed to mean. The letters started out being mailed to her mailbox. They contained stamps on the envelope. Afterwards, they were hand placed in the mailbox, and then they ended up directly at her doorstep. Cindy was so scared that she contacted the police. Obviously, it was just kids, playing a prank on her, or she was just crazy and just completely making it up, obviously. One night after a really long day of work, Cindy came home to her front porch lights completely smashed out, and there were multiple dead cats hanging from the ceiling. Cindy went to make a phone call, and she realized that all the phone lines were cut. Another day, Cindy made plans for her friend Agnes to come over. And when Cindy didn't answer the door for Agnes, she just thought that maybe she was busy outside. She made her way to the back of the house where she found Cindy on the ground, struggling with a nylon stocking wrapped around her neck. Cindy said that some man came up behind her and she was unable to see what this guy looked like and started strangling her. He stopped because she believes that the knocking from Agnes scared him away. So luckily, she was able to get free and was saved. Even after this incredibly traumatic incident, the harassment didn't stop. There were pictures of women that were in a morgue taped to her car. Raw meat was delivered to her door. Now, raise your hand if you know somebody that is so bad at seeing red flags that they'd be like, oh my God, they're artistic and trying to buy me dinner. That's so thoughtful. Cindy came home on another occasion and found her dog almost dead with a black nylon stocking wrapped around his neck. Luckily, she was able to get the dog free in time and he was okay. The police were absolutely zero help. Every time Cindy reached out talking about the harassment that she was having to face, they just thought that she was crazy. Finally, Cindy had enough. She moved away. She changed her last name. She didn't tell anybody she was moving except for her parents. And she was like, okay, I'm safe. There's no way that this person will find me. Cindy hired a private investigator to take on her case as well, just to make sure that she was extra safe. He gave her a cordless walkie-talkie so they could communicate without having to worry about the phone lines being cut. He also installed motion sensor porch lights to provide extra security. One night, the private investigator that Cindy hired noticed that there was some weird static on the other end of the walkie. Like it was like clicking, like it was trying to like connect or something. And this guy, he's just like, something is going on. I need to just go over there and make sure she's okay. He didn't want to try to reach out through the walkie talkie just in case that there was somebody over there possibly harassing her. So he just wanted to be safe. He walked into Cindy's house and found her lying on the floor. There was a knife stabbed completely through her hand with a note attached to the knife that said, "You're dead." Cindy said that she couldn't remember anything. The only thing that she could recall was laying in bed and just feeling like there was some kind of needle mark going in her skin. The doctors did find an impression of a needle mark and said that the angle of the needle insertion, as well as the angle of the knife in Cindy's hand, would have made it impossible for Cindy to have done that to herself on her own. So finally, the police were like, okay, you're being stalked. We get it. They set up some kind of surveillance around Cindy's house. And while the police were there was nothing going on. There were no phone calls, there were no intruders. The more time that went by, the more the cops were just like, dude, we knew it. She's been making this up the whole time. They kind of just really weren't invested in her case at all. Soon after kind of finding nothing to go on, the police pulled back, and it was a few days later that Cindy was found in a ditch close by. She was covered in cuts and bruises. She was covered in blood. She had a black nylon stocking wrapped around her neck, which seems to be this guy's weapon of choice. She was also wearing one men's boot on her foot. Luckily, Cindy was still alive and able to recover. When Cindy got out of the hospital, her really good friend Agnes was like, I feel like we should stay the night over at your house. So Agnes and her husband did indeed do that. That very night that Agnes and her husband Tom stayed with Cindy, a fire broke out in Cindy's house. Tom went to call 911 and the phone lines were cut. He ran out of Cindy's house screaming for help and noticed a very strange man. He couldn't really get a description because it was dark, standing in front of Cindy's house, completely in awe, just looking like he was in this weird trance. Tom called out to this man to call 911, and it seemed like it kind of snapped him out of this trance and he just ran into the darkness. Police came to the house again. They didn't really do any kind of forensic search or look for any real evidence, and they blamed Cindy. They said she started the fire. Cindy was for some reason taken to a mental hospital. I think it was a combination of people kind of starting to think that maybe she was crazy. I know her family was concerned that she was having thoughts about possibly doing some self harm because this whole ordeal was really just putting a really bad energy on Cindy. Like it was really getting her down, and she started to really suffer mentally. Cindy stayed 10 weeks in the mental hospital, and when she came out, she decided to have a real heart to heart with her family. She said that she has been so scared and she was concerned for their safety and that she possibly knew who was doing this to her. She said that this man would threaten to kill her whole family if she ever mentioned who she thought he was. Cindy finally confessed and said she thought that it was her ex husband, Roy Makepeace, who was doing all of this to her. Now, the police did interview Roy, and he was a really well respected psychiatrist and basically said, no, 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 you have it all wrong. Cindy calls me all the time, threatening to kill herself and threatening to kill me. And I believe she has some kind of borderline personality disorder. Cindy did pass a polygraph test substantiating that she was indeed being harassed. Everything came back to be truthful, but they still were not believing her. After the police interviewed Roy, Cindy would soon go missing. Her car was found at a local supermarket, and the driver's side door was covered in blood. 2 weeks would go by until they finally found Cindy's body. She was found dumped in the yard of an abandoned house. Now, the weird part about this is the house was abandoned, but the street that the house was on was very well traveled. There was people constantly walking by and cars going by, and it was a pretty busy neighborhood. So the fact that this body just kind of suddenly appeared out of nowhere was very strange. Forensics did identify the day that Cindy died, and it was coinciding with the day that she was reported missing. So for her body to kind of be out in the elements for 2 weeks and not to be seen is just, it's a head scratcher. Cindy's body showed needle marks in her arms that were later to be found that she was being injected with morphine. Her hands and her feet were bound. She had that classic black nylon stocking wrapped around her neck, the same black stocking that was found wrapped around her neck previously, that was found wrapped around her dog's neck. It was determined that Cindy's death was caused by a morphine overdose. So the police admitted they were wrong. They admitted that they completely failed Cindy and didn't take her seriously. Oh, no, 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 no. I'm just kidding. They ruled her death an accidental suicide. They did. Yep. She was found tied up, but she did it herself. The yard that her body was found in was 2 miles from her car. So Cynthia injected herself with a butt ton of morphine. She tied a black nylon stocking around her neck, tied her arms and legs up, and just poof, fell over and died for 2 weeks. Nobody saw it happen. That seems pretty logical if you ask me. Cindy's sister actually wrote a book. She 100% believes that her sister was murdered. There are a lot of people that think it was Roy Makepeace. He was the culprit in the whole scenario. But there's still that select few that think Cindy was just crazy and made it up. And she indeed did OD on morphine and did it completely by herself. Cindy was failed by so many people, and I truly believe that this was indeed a murder. On January 2nd, 1935, Roland T. Owen checked himself into room 1046 at the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri. He was very nicely dressed at the time of check in, and witnesses describe him as being pretty handsome, between 20 to 30 years old. They did notice that he had a scar on his head and a cauliflower ear, which they thought might mean he was some kind of boxer or fighter of some sort. The lights on, and the day he checked in, he left his door unlocked and mentioned that he was waiting for a guest. He didn't seem to unpack any clothing or even bring any clothing to the room, just a few hygiene items like a brush, a toothbrush, the usuals. Around 4:30, the maid returned to Owen's room to drop off some fresh towels. Isn't that the best part of hotels? Like the nice, fresh, crisp towels that they give you? She noticed that the door was locked from the outside, so she just assumed that Owen might have went out for the evening. She let herself in and saw Owen sitting up completely, perfectly on the bed. The lights were turned off, the blinds were down, and he was just sitting in complete darkness, full suit. She noticed a note on the table next to the bed that says, "Don, wait. I will be back in 15 minutes." The maid described Owen's behavior as uneasy. She thought he seemed kind of scared and worried and just didn't seem normal. She noted that Owen received a phone call and he just sounded kind of annoyed and just kept saying he wasn't hungry. He wasn't hungry. The poor maid went back the next day around 4 o'clock to drop off more towels when she heard two men talking. So she politely knocked on the door, and one of the men that didn't sound like Owen said, "What? Who is it? What do you want?" She mentioned that she had fresh towels, and the man refused and asked her to leave. On January 4th, the hotel noticed that Owen's phone was left off the hook, and this was a little unusual. The bellboy went to check on Owen to make sure that he was okay. Owen's door was closed, so the bellboy knocked and asked if he could come in. After this, a very low voice said, "Yes, come in, turn on the lights." The bellboy went to open the door and realized it was locked, and he wasn't really into playing these silly games. He assumed Owen was some kind of drunk person that was just a lot to deal with. So he basically sternly said, "Your phone's off the hook, hang it up," and went on his way. A few hours go by and the phone is still off the hook. So this resilient bellboy went into Owen's room. All the lights were turned off. Again, the blinds were closed. He saw Owen in bed, lying completely naked. He did notice some dark stains surrounding his body. He just assumed, again, Owen was intoxicated, so he grabbed the phone, hung it up, and just walked out of the room. Another hour goes by, and boom, Owen's phone is off the hook again. This bellboy has had enough. He goes up to Owen's room. He flings open Owen's hotel door and sees him lying on the floor. He's on his hands and knees, covering his head, and the entire room is just covered in blood. Owen's head is bleeding profusely. There is blood all over the bed. There is blood on the ceiling, on the walls, all over Owen's bathroom. Obviously, the bellboy was completely traumatized, ran downstairs, and immediately asked for help. Owen was tied, beat up, and tortured. He was hit so many times in his head that his skull was fractured. He was stabbed multiple times in his chest that it punctured his lungs. But miraculously, Owen was still alive at this point. The police rushed over and immediately approached Owen and was like, "Who did this to you? How did this happen?" And somehow Owen was able to kind of somehow mumble out that he fell and hit his head on the bathtub. I hate when that happens. Owen was rushed to the hospital and they realized that he was attacked around 7 hours prior to being found. So Owen was just laying there bleeding out. How poor Owen did not bleed to death immediately is it's kind of a miracle, I guess. So going back to when the bellboy first approached Owen about his phone being off the hook and Owen invited him to come in and turn the lights on, Owen was already attacked at that point and suffering from his injuries. So maybe if the bellboy would have just opened the door at that point or unlocked the door, maybe they could have gotten to him sooner and gotten him help sooner because unfortunately, a few hours after being rushed to the hospital, Owen was dead. The police found no clothes in the hotel room. They found no knives. There was no soap. There were no towels. Like the usual stocked items that hotels usually have were completely wiped out. They did find an unsmoked cigarette, a bottle of diluted sulfuric acid, and what they believe is a woman's fingerprints left on the phone. Police tried very hard to find Owen's next of kin, and they really wanted to know more about this Dawn character who they believe stayed with Owen in the hotel room. They unfortunately had zero leads on either identity, and there was a ad placed in a local newspaper looking for any information on Owen. The newspaper also mentioned that Owen would have a burial at a potter's field. And I had to look that up because I wasn't sure what that was. And it's basically kind of just like a field where they put bodies that aren't claimed. It's very low key. After that article was placed, the funeral home that had Owen's body received a anonymous phone call. They insisted Owen have a proper funeral and would offer to pay good money for this to happen. Soon after the phone call, there was a newspaper delivered to the funeral home, and it was kind of like wrapped up. And inside the newspaper was a huge lump of money. So Owen did receive a proper burial. He received a tombstone, which later was found to have flowers placed at it, as well as a letter that says, "All my love, Louise." 2 years after Owen's death, the news went with another article with a sketch of what Owen looked like. And they were just hoping that somebody somewhere knew who Owen was and they just wanted to provide some kind of closure and update on what happened to him. Owen's mother actually came forward and said that the picture in the newspaper article was that of her son who did leave town in 1935, the same year that Owen went to this hotel. However, Owen was not his name at all. His name was really Artemis Ogletree. Now, what in the Harry Potter wizarding world is that? That is, if that was my name, I would not have an alias because that name is so mwah, chef's kiss. No, you live up to your name, Artemis. That is a brilliant name. Artemis was actually only 17 years old at the time of his death. Another weird kind of fact about this case is Artemis's mom received 3 letters from Artemis. They were all typed out, but this was after he was already killed. And his mom knew immediately that this was not from her son. Artemis did not know how to type, and just the wording and the phrasing and the lingo used in these letters, she knew that that was not from her son. After the news of who Owen really was came out, it was found that Artemis actually ended up staying at another Kansas City hotel with a gentleman, Don maybe, but again, nobody knew the real identity of this man. And like think about it back then, like there wasn't like a lot of protocols in place to provide ID and like basically if you had money, you were welcome. In 2003, a local historian at the Kansas City Library received an anonymous call. This caller was from out of state and would not give their identity. All the information that they gave was they were going through boxes that belonged to an elderly person that had recently passed away, and they found a bunch of articles about the Artemis case. Now, aside from all these articles, they claimed to have found a piece of evidence that was mentioned in these articles, but they did not elaborate what that was. They just kept saying it was very important information. That was the last lead of this grotesque murder because after that, evidence kind of just didn't progress. The case just went cold and it's still a mystery. So, who's Dawn? Where did this mystery woman come from? Because she was never mentioned in any of the witness accounts, but yet her fingerprints were found. And who's Luis? There are so many questions to what happened to Owen slash Artemis, and just the way he was killed is so just horrendous. And it was almost 100 years ago and is still just a big old question mark. I hated the last two. They were awful. I hate this one. I do not like it. On March 31st, 1922, it's almost the anniversary. I did not realize that until now. 6 people were murdered. These were residents of the Hinterkaifeck farm in Bavaria, Germany. The victims were Andreas Gruber, his wife, their daughter, who was recently widowed, the daughter's 2 children, who were ages 7 and 2, and a newly hired maid. Every single individual was taken down and brutally murdered with a pickaxe. The 2 year old son was killed in his crib, presumably while sleeping, as well as the maid Maria. She was found in the house, also lying in bed. The 4 remaining family members were found in a barn located on the property. It is believed that they were somehow lured into the barn one by one. Like they didn't just all come in at once, but it was like one person came in and was killed, and then another person was come in. And I don't know how they ended up in the barn, but it was just a very awful fate that they were met with. Their bodies were stacked one upon one on top of each other. A very just absolutely heartbreaking detail is evidence shows that the 7-year-old girl was somehow still alive after she was brutally beaten with the pickaxe and thrown on top of her family. And she ripped out patches of her hair. They believe she did this because she was scared and in so much pain. It was just some kind of impulse. I I think I need a moment. Like I just need let's let's tell a joke. Let's just like soften up the mood with a joke. What's a pirate's favorite letter? You think it's the C, but it's really the R. Thank you, SpongeBob. All right, let's get back to it. So, obviously, the brutal slaying of 6 people is completely grotesque. But there are even weirder details to this story. Like, for instance, days, days after this family was completely slaughtered, whoever did it stayed in the family's house. They ate food at their kitchen table. They let their dog out. They tended to the cattle that was on the farm. They used their fireplace. The neighbors saw smoke billowing out. So they just assumed that everything was fine. There was nothing really out of the ordinary going on. After the children didn't show up to school and nobody could really get a hold of this family, that's when concerns started to grow. Someone finally went to check on the Grubers, and that is when they found all six of their bodies. So the family actually had a maid 6 months prior to Maria starting, and the maid actually quit because she thought that there was evil in the house. She thought that the house was haunted, and she basically left her long term job because of it. The family did notice some weird occurrences right before their death. The family swears that they heard footsteps in the attic. And let me go back to my first video that I ever posted. The attic is the most underrated spooky place in your entire house. Pause the video. I want you to pause this video right now. I'm getting all sweaty and like worked up. Pause the video. Go check your attic. Just go check it right now. I just want you to be safe. Go get a lock. Lock that shit up. The attic is the worst place in your entire house. They heard kind of whispering voices that they believed to be coming through the walls. Their house keys went missing. Mr. Gruber found this newspaper that no one in the family bought or even subscribed to. It's just like this random newspaper that showed up in their house. Their tool shed was found with all these weird scratch marks on it, and it was broken into. The same tool shed that they kept the pickaxe. Mr. Gruber also noticed footprints in the snow that was leading up to the house that weren't any of the family's, but didn't leave the house. He was so convinced that there was something in the attic that he did investigate. He went up there and he didn't find anything out of the ordinary. So it is very plausible that whoever murdered this family was staying in the house for months before they ended up killing them all. That's terrifying. Now, it can't get worse for this family. There's absolutely no way it can get worse for it gets worse. During the entire family's autopsies, their heads were removed, which I didn't know is a practice during an autopsy, but they wanted to, I guess, look for evidence and look for clues within their skulls, so they just took off all of the family's heads. And they lost every single one of them. I lose a lot of things. I do. I lose my keys, I lose my phone, I lose a lot of things. But a head, like, okay, you lose one head, you're not really good at your job. You lose two heads, you definitely need a new career. How do you lose six people's heads? Where did they go? What happened to them? The family all had to be laid to rest completely headless. That is just awful. It's so awful. Police originally suspected that the murders were some kind of burglary gone wrong, but all of the valuables were still left in the house. There was a big sum of money that was completely untouched. Nothing was missing. Police just kept going, trying to find out who did this to the family, and they kept the case open even into the late 80s. They had a bunch of different suspects, but none of them really panned out and had a strong enough lead to go with. And it's almost 100 years later, and there is no break in the case. Obviously, whoever did this got away with it, which is terrifying. It's hard to think that somebody that just brutally kills all those people just stops there and just keeps going on with their life. It's just really sad that basically all the people in all three of these cases never got justice. Their families never got justice. Even their families, they never received closure. And it's absolutely awful when something like this happens, but to have no face or even cause to what happened or who did this, I can't even imagine. Let me know what you guys think of all three of these cases. Let me know if there's any cases that you want me to talk about. I do enjoy talking about true crime, even though it does give me nightmares, but what doesn't give me nightmares at this point? Also, let me hear your jokes. Let me hear some good jokes. So when I'm talking about these things, I can just refer back to them, so that would be great. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. My last video got like the nicest comments, and I cannot tell you how much it means to me. I see them and I just appreciate them so much. So thank you very much for watching this. I hope you have a great day. You matter. Don't forget that. You matter. And I will see you on the next one. Bye.